Okay, so this is the Mutant bass drum. I'll start and work my way around the module. We've got a tone, which is the amount of transient and envelope on that pitch drum. So that takes to a much softer sounding drum, up full, harder little transient click and more of that pitch envelope on the start. Speaking of pitch, we've got the pitch up nice and high. We've got the general volume of the bass drum, which is useful if you're using unity mixers and mixers without as much level control. We've got the decay for the drum, from a short little click to a longer note. We've also got a built-in distortion and a clean and a distortion output. So going over to the distortion, we start with a distortion level input and a distortion amount. So anything from slightly warmer, thicker sounding kicks up to more hard house style squared off thump. Now we've got CV on the module, and going back to the clean, I'm going to take an input into the pitch CV, and we've got this pitch CV depth. We've got CV for decay, and also a CV for distortion amount. So let's put some CV into distortion. So you can actually get some moving bass lines from this module as well. Okay, so here's a Mutant clap, and you can see the pitch control right in the middle. Right from sort of odd alien splutters and glitches, through Atari style clock noise, up to more white like noise. We've got a sustain level, fully sustain, and a reverb, which is sort of special circuit that derives a reverb like tone from the input signal. So with that down, no reverb, up full, it's deriving that noise from that input signal. Now we've got a filter on this as well for the noise. You can switch that filter on, and that's sort of like a peaking bandpass, but it certainly helps to create those classic clap sounds that you'll be familiar with. The external input acts as a volume control when there is no external input, and with a drive amount as well. You can use the external input to process other sounds and turn those into clap-like sounds. So here's some phase distortion oscillator sounds. And then the reverb has some nice trickery in there as well. The switch can be off, so regardless of the reverb level it's off. When we flick it down to external, it derives the reverb-like tone from the external in, or the sound that's coming out of its output, processed through the filter and the drive and the other things. The reverb can still come from the internal sound though, so flicking this up, you can hear this reverb is now adding noise to the sound. And that's because it's generating it from that internal sound, sort of creating these clever envelopes that sound like a decaying reverb from that internal noise source. Taking that out, we go back to the noise. And we've got CV inputs for the pitch of that noise. So here's just some random modulation from some sample and hold. Taking that all over the place, some odd random splutters from that low pitch, and clap-like sounds from the higher ones. We can also modulate the reverb amount. So we've a filtered noise decay on some of those notes, and that's from that random modulation. You can use that alongside the pitch. So this is just some random modulation, pulling it all over the place for the sake of ease, but you could really carefully sequence this to get some really clever little fills and intricate changes in that tone and length of the sound of your claps. Okay, so this is the Mutant hi-hats. You've got an open hi-hat on the left and a closed hi-hat on the right. So we've got the purple cable triggering the open, the blue triggering the closed, and same for those outputs directly underneath. The first thing in programming hi-hats is, do they act like a real pair of hi-hats, in that if they're open you can't possibly hit it closed, and when they close again does that open sound cut off, and you have a switch in the middle for that, three-way toggle switch. At the minute that's off, but when I click this down to fade, notice that when the closed hi-hat triggers, the open hi-hat fades down out of the way, slightly more like a real hi-hat, and you might be used to this from some drum machines as well. Off again in the middle, and at the top, this is one or the other. The open can't trigger when the closed is triggered, and it cuts that sound off. We've got a driver mount for the closed hi-hats, and a driver mount for the open. External controls the volume, and no other external signal is present. So you can drive and balance these levels. We've got a decay mount for the open hi-hat. Turn this off. Notice that toggle starts to have a bigger effect on a longer decay. We've also got CV over decay amount. I've also got this cutoff. So with a cutoff, you turn the filter on. You've got this peaking filter. Taking the sound of an oscillator, like we did for the clap, into external. And taking out the closed hi-hats. On longer decays, you can still use this crossover. So you've got that cross between open and closed hi-hats, and the opportunity to CV the decay of that open hi-hat as well, which can be great for these progressing and slowly modulating changes in a mix. Okay, so this is the Mutant machine, and this aims to model all sorts of different percussion with a membrane, which is this like drum skin, drum head type thing, and the snappy, which is the noise generation and transient click generation. And we have the middle section where we've got some of the processing, the pitch envelopes, and the decay of the sound as well. So starting on the left and working our way right with a Mutant machine, we've got the membrane, which aims to model this drum skin, drum head type thing. So turn up the first level, we can flick through the waves, which is a sine, triangle, and square. We've got a second waveform, and the detune between these two waves is actually set on this detune knob. We've still got a master tuning on this pitch control. Going back to one oscillator, we've got a pitch envelope with a pitch envelope amount and a pitch envelope decay. This can be really helpful for creating something kick-like. We've got an output drive. Really drive, clip and fuzzy up that tone, or have a warmer, less driven sound, or even turn that off to the left. Now for the pitch, we've actually got a pitch control and a pitch CV amount going to that pitch. So turn the envelope down. We can have this tracking just like an oscillator. So pitch CV and turn up the pitch CV amount. This is just some slewed random modulation. You could create an actual sequence for this, should you wish, with a second oscillator. This will track as well. But what we do have is this actual scanning between the waveforms. So if I turn one waveform down, and actually enable scanning, we've got this scanning frequency. And this switches between those waves. You can actually influence this time that this is taking, so how fast the scanning is, on the frequency CV, and there's a CV depth there as well. So if that's our speed, notice that's speeding up and slowing down. Turning that down, this goes right up into audio rate. So with a single oscillator and just that scanning frequency up, some great tones. Let's mix in the second oscillator and some CV, that's scanning. So this is flicking between all these different audio rates. You can enable scanning on the other wave as well, or disable that on the switch. Taking out that CV and turning off the scanning. Notice we've got an accent input, and also we didn't look at it, there is an accent input on the bass drum, the clap and the hi-hats as well. So it's louder with a longer envelope for those accents. Great for creating more dynamic patterns. Now turning these oscillators down in the membrane section, we move over to the snappy section, and we've got this click, which is exactly that, this little transient click, which if we were to mix that in, just with a little percussive blip, this nice click. We've then got a level on the noise, with a pitch, as that's clock noise, similar to what you find in the clap. And we've got a decay as well. Adding CV to the decay, it's almost like creating dynamic open and closed hi-hat style patterns. We've also got CV in for the pitch. So you can control the pitch and the decay of that noise really dynamically with CV. Now going back to the level controls for the membrane, turn those up and turning the scanning on. These are just at random frequencies. You could clock this with a clock that's actually creating your trigger rhythms for your drums. But what's also really interesting is if you take a stackable, and let's say take that accent pattern. So every time this accents, this is going to move down a wave by putting a clock into that scanning frequency. You can actually get these on different waves by turning one off and back on again. That works great, and notice if we take this out, it's going to stay static because the cable's not plugged in. I still want that accent in. Now per note on this purple cable is what's actually triggering our sound. So now per note this is changing wave. Again, great for these dynamic sequences. Let's mix in some noise. Click. Pitch envelope. Take the clock out, get to audio rate. playing around, let's get a kick-like sound. Click. So it's great for things like 909 snares, really custom percussion. It's a real powerhouse of drum synthesis. Creates some really interesting sounds. So to finish off the current Mutant Drum series from Hexinverter, we've got the Mutant Hot Glue with 4 channels, with channel B having 2 inputs for closed and open hi-hats. We've got individual outs and little submix outs. We've got a compressor with a blend mode for that parallel New York style compression. We've also got a distortion in, which you can use separately just like the kick, and some CV in for that distortion, and a sidechain for the compressor, and some different routing for channel A if you want to sidechain the compressor against the kick, or leave it in the mix and have that be compressed as well. So I've got a mix playing and some of these drums playing. Here's the kick. Hi-hats on channel B. Clap on C. And the Mutant Machine on D. We've got these sender mounts and a return level. Now I've got the send and return going to a reverb, so let's send a clap up into the reverb. And that return level as well. Moving on to the edge of the mixer, we've got a compression. And this has got a blender mount, ratio, threshold, and some different attack and release settings in the back on jumpers as well. If you want to change the activity and how this actually reacts to the mix, you can actually change that on the jumpers. Now blending the compressor in full, got a 1:1 ratio and a low threshold. Turning the ratio up, notice that kick's unaffected. That's because it's set to be out of the compressor out rather than the mix out. Let's flick it into the mix. Clean the threshold down and the ratio up. Turn the gain up. Nice, really thick compressed drum sound with that blend. You can go from completely dry, uncompressed, to fully wet, and anywhere in between. Now with that blend up, let's actually take the kick to be out of the mix. Notice that compressor's reacting differently now because that kick's not affecting it. So I'm going to take the kick's channels on out and route that to the side chain in on the compressor. Notice that's been pushed and pulled around by the kick. Let's put some reverb on that clap so you can tell the difference a bit more. Notice how that reverb grows and gets sucked back down when that kick hits. We take the side chain out, route the mix back through it. We'll go dry on that. We can actually come out of the distortion out and route the compressor's output to the input of the distortion. Again, notice we've got a blender mount and a distortion level. So you can go to absolute chaos should you want it, and as well this distortion works really well if you're mixing synths, because although this is a drum mixer essentially, that's what it's made for, the Mutant series, you've got 4 channels there with effects and return, compression and distortion. This could be your output mixer, this could be submixing pads and effects and more ambient things if you want to use it that way instead of as a drum mixer. And that distortion might be that bit more useful at some of those harder settings for synths as opposed to drum sounds. But with a blend, we can set a hard drum sound and just colour the background with a low blend. At softer levels, can get that compressor and that distortion working together to really glue everything together. Really nice compression and distortion in that mixer.